don't block the path of inquiry. Don't lay down rules that make it impossible for people to ask important questions.
Welcome to the Thought Stretchers podcast, where we hope to stretch your thinking about important issues in education through rich inquiry. My name is Drew Perkins, and I'm your host for these conversations for complexity and nuance. Hello again, and thanks as always for tuning in. I wanted to share a couple of notes on some things that we have coming up and going on around here. First off is a reminder that if you're interested in learning more about project-based learning as an individual or a small group, I would invite you to check out our PBL Grow 24 event, which is coming up in June 24th through 26th in our home base of Louisville, Kentucky. This event is limited to 40 seats, so it's not meant to be a big event, and those spots are starting to fill up. So if you're interested, now's the time to register. And I'd also like to invite you to our Thought Stretchers education community, which you can find at thoughtstretchers.org. Some of you have been in on some of those events that we're holding online, and we're starting to gain some traction and get some momentum and have some really intellectually nourishing conversations. So if you're interested in something like that, please do check out thoughtstretchers.org and sign in and sign up and join us for some of those events. And of course, don't forget about our main professional development website at wegrowteachers.com. We have our project-based learning workshops there, our inquiry and differentiated instruction workshops. We also are offering artificial intelligence workshops and objective pluralism, which you'll hear us talk about in this podcast episode. So if you're looking to grow your school, please go to wegrowteachers.com. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or ideas for me, you can email me at drew@thoughtstretchers.org. In this episode, I spoke with Ronn Nozoe, who is the CEO of NASSP, National Association of Secondary School Principals. Ron was on the podcast previously. I think we were still Teach Thought PD at that point, and you hear us talk about that a bit. But we were here to talk about the 2024 federal education budget and their work with that. So we started by talking about their National School Leaders Advocacy Conference, and I asked him about the concerns that they received from legislators, because I imagine there were several, depending on which aisle they were meeting with. We talked about educator shortages and some of the financial incentives that they are advocating for to help with that, as well as loan forgiveness, which of course falls under that umbrella of financial incentives, and ways they can help support principals and all educators with their mental health. The last thing we talked about was an offshoot of that and how they are and how we are dealing with or helping educators deal with some of the culture war issues. And so it's interesting to get his take on that and some of the on-the-ground kinds of things that he's hearing from their principals and their members. And on that note, you'll hear us towards the end of this podcast conversation make reference to a Thought Stretchers education community event titled Community-Led Education, Overcoming the Culture Wars. That event was held on April 18th, and the archived audio has since been published as a podcast in the episode previous to this one. We had a really good group of about 25 participants and our two panelists. So if you're interested in listening back to that intellectually nourishing conversation, you can find it on our main website, wegrowteachers.com, in the podcast section. It was published April 29th, and it's on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's also at thoughtstretchers.org in the podcast section there, which is also, of course, where you can find other events that you can RSVP and join and participate in. As always, I hope this is a helpful conversation, and without further ado, here is that conversation with Ron. I am with Ronn Nozoe, who is the CEO of NASSP, the National Association of Secondary School Principals. And Ron was on the podcast, I don't know when it was, Ron, when you were on, but maybe a year or two ago when we were still Teach Thought PD. But I'm happy to have you back. We're going to talk about the budget and spending and federal education budgets and all that kind of stuff. But I want to give you an opportunity to say hello and maybe do any short introductions, as folks may not be. You are internationally known, but maybe not to our audience in particular.
Yeah. Well, hello, Drew. Thanks again for having me on your show here, and for, of course, the work that you're doing now. Congratulations on your the switch of your org, and also your long history of doing great work in support of education and educators. So
Thank you.
thanks. Hey, aloha, everybody. I'm Ronn Nozoe from the National Association of Secondary School Principals. Executive summary is a lifelong educator, served from pretty much every role from teacher through principal, district superintendent, state deputy, and then spent some time at the U.S. Department of Ed and in the nonprofit space for nonprofit space for almost 10 years now. So very thankful to still be connected to the profession that I love. I'm a child of public educators as well, so it's in our blood. So just anytime I get to engage with people who are educators or the people who support educators is always a good day for me.
Right. Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about for sure is the 2024 federal education budget, and you all did some lobbying and some discussion with legislators in Congress. And Chris Young, who actually has been on the podcast as well, so I think was the principal of the year. I don't know, 2023 probably, maybe 2024. I can't remember, one of those years. But he was on some time ago. But I know he was a part of that, and I'm not sure what your involvement was exactly, if you were there, but I guess kind of unpack that. What are the big pieces and NASSP's demands or requests or whatever that might be?
Well, first of all, shout out to Chris Young. I'm honored to even be in the same conversation or same paragraph as him. He was also named our Advocacy Champion of the Year because of the work that he continues to do in his home state of Vermont. Great guy. And Drew, what you're referring to is the National School Leaders Advocacy Conference that we, in partnership with our sister organization, the National Association of Elementary School Principals, or NAESP, put on annually. And this year we had 400 principals and assistant principals and folks from their state association together. And we had a conference together, and then went on the hill. NAESP and NASSP, we work very carefully to have a common advocacy agenda. We represent all the principals in the country, and all our principals, based on what we hear and what we see in the world, all our principals were aligned around two very evergreen issues for us. One, the educator pipeline issue, the shortages at every level in K-12, and then who are filling those positions, and then who are we recruiting and developing to take on increasing roles of responsibility. And a very close second to it, mental health and well-being for everybody, kids, families, educators, people who support educators, so we went up there. Thankfully, it was right before the final voting on the appropriations package, and I'm very thankful that our nation's elected officials, they all made time to sit with our members and to really hear their stories. And I'm so proud of our members for coming out of their safe zones and being vulnerable and talking about the stories about how federal funds and federal decisions positively and or negatively affect what they're trying to do to provide quality education for every kid. So it was an intense time, but I'm very proud of the principals and assistant principals and state association folk who came with us, because they're not out there like this is not. They're not, as you well know, Drew. The principals have been continue to be they are the highest, the most trusted public officials, and it's been that way for the last decade at least. And so I'm very thankful when the elected officials stop what they're doing, they make time in their very busy schedules to sit down with our members and truly listen to what our members are saying, because our members are not trying to get $1 for themselves or do something. There's nothing selfish about the work they're doing. They're trying to get all the resources and decisions they can that will make a quality education accessible and achievable for every single kid.
So, I'm curious. What are some of the pushbacks that, if any, that the legislators shared? I mean, I'm sure there's got to be some folks that aren't as supportive as others, especially of public school, and that's part of the, some of the culture war battles and things like that. So I'm curious what those discussions sounded like, especially from the criticism and concern side.
Well, it's a range, right? And this is thank you for asking the question, because it's a little complicated, but it's super. I believe it's super worthy about talking about. So the range goes from, hey man, you guys aren't pushing hard enough, to you're pushing too hard, and what I mean by that is, some folks would like us to be more extreme on one end the political spectrum, and other people would like us to be more extreme on the other end of the spectrum. And as we remind everyone, number one, we're not a union. Two, we're not a political organization. We have members from every walk of life, every state, every zip code, we are a representative we represent our members' voices. And so we don't come in there with pick a side of the aisle kind of approach. We come in there saying, based on our professional experiences and our local experiences, this is what our kids need, and here's how we need help around these things. And so, for example, folks on one end of the spectrum will say, well, you're not asking for enough on a particular issue that they happen to be passionate about. Mm-hmm. And then on the other end of the spectrum, people say, well, you're asking for too much money, and it's more money than we have. So you're asking us to spend, to deficit spend, basically. And so, one end wants to trim the budget, the other one wishes that we were asking for more. And our response is the same. Well, I understand that that's your position, but we're just telling you this is what the kids in our communities are saying. And strangely enough, and I think that every elected official thinks the schools that they visit all the time in their particular neighborhood or region are excellent. They're just not so thrilled about the schools in other places. And so It's really interesting when I remember start talking with their respective members of Congress or their local elected officials. Everybody loves their schools. And then all of a sudden people are, throwing rocks at each other about this, that, and the other. And so we try to stay away from that political frame when we do this We don't get engaged in any of that, because none of our stuff is partisan. Because we are a national organization that represents members from all walks of life, every possible, zip code, orientation, preference, all of that stuff. All of our members are all of that, and so we don't take a side. The only side we take is what's best for kids and what's best for the people who support kids.
Yeah, well, the idea of not being a political organization doesn't seem to be popular these days. It seems like even the most it's supposed to be non-political organizations feel compelled to be partisan or political or make statements, and that has gotten them in some hot water. So I think that is a good policy, at least as far as I'm concerned. It's hard to navigate, no doubt. You're 100% right about that.
Yeah, because people want to use us for different things, and we
right.
Principles are not for sale. We're not. We do what our members do, what they believe is based on the conditions and the culture of the area. And that's why we believe in local control, because that nobody knows the local jurisdiction better than the people who live there. So we want to empower them to be able to be decision makers and game changers in their local areas. And because of the role that they play, people trust them more than other public officials, because principals are honest folk. They're not trying to pull one over on anybody. They're just trying to do a good job.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I know is a big concern is the shortage in educators attracting and retaining, and not just teachers but principals. And of course, you're focused on principals by mission.
Yep.
And talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah. So we are focused on principals by mission, but true to form, principals are concerned about everybody else. So So yeah, they're worried about, their own positions and their own livelihoods and all of that, but they're more worried about making sure that, we have enough bus drivers that are good. We have enough good cafeteria and custodial staff. We have enough office workers, mental health professionals, support staff, like their concern is making sure that they have the best people possible on their campuses to do the best they can for kids. And so we we in partnership with NASSP are very concerned about the educator pipeline. And so that's one of our evergreen advocacy points, which is, election season, everybody talks about wanting to have the best schools. Well, we need to invest in education in this country in a way that reflects that, right now the actions don't match the words.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, we have to. We're the United States of America, Drew. If we truly wanted a world-class educational system, we'd have it. There's no doubt in my mind. We're in America. We're capable of doing anything, right? But I want to ask that. So, well, how come we? Well, I'm not going to get into that, but we do need to keep reminding folks that education is not a profession where you can just grab a person off the street and toss them in the ring, right? When you're dealing with children and really truly adults being in charge of and responsible for children during a school day or the period of time that they're on the campus, you want really good people there. We can't afford to have people with questionable records or whatever. And so making sure that all of our systems are aligned around identifying talent, recruiting that talent, growing the talent is really important, because all the research shows the most powerful variable in a child's education is the teacher, and a very close second, and arguably the research has also confirmed this, as you well know, Drew, that the principal, depending on the aspect that you're factoring in, a principal is either very close second to the principal teacher's effect size, or in some cases even greater than. And so if you have to invest in quality, you should probably start with the teachers and support staff and the principal. That's where you're going to get your most bang for the buck. And so that's why we're so focused on it, because we believe that we can get our country to a much better place in the education space if we actually put some energy and effort in a concerted way behind sort of identifying and growing and recruiting and retaining talent. So this issue continues to be a big one for us because people have left, people are still leaving, and we also still have this pending aging out of the baby boomers and then the net following generation. People are getting to that age of retirement now. So we're going to lose a lot of folk, and the colleges and higher institutions of higher education are not producing as many education graduates. And so you can see this is a grave concern for us, because we need to incentivize people to go into education, but not just like open the door and say anybody with a pulse come on in. We don't need that. We need people really good people to make a conscious decision to commit to service.
So some of the things that you are asked or have asked Congress to do, and of course the budget's out, so to the extent they did this, I'm curious. Bolstering the investments in the educator pipeline. We want to try to expand professional development. So there's the financial incentives for principals that you mentioned, and the professional development and getting that coaching to help them be better. And I'm curious. Obviously the financial piece is something that makes sense for me with Congress because they have purse strings and there's federal money, but I'm not as clear on the connection to the professional development opportunities that you're mentioning. So I'm curious what both of those might look like, and what they actually did in the report, and how you felt about that.
Sure. So thanks for asking the question, but you're an expert, Drew, so you know that Title II funding, which is funding that includes provisions for providing quality professional development for teachers and paraprofessionals and educators and principals. And Title II is kind of a hot potato that people like to toss around. People argue about the merits and the demerits of Title II. And what I'll say is, this is so funny that in education, this becomes such a big issue. But every single Fortune 500 company in the world, every single successful business, every single organization that's thriving has a really clear and well-developed onboarding regimen, orientation regimen, training and support protocols and systems, because every smart employer, every smart business knows that they're only as good as the people that they bring on into their organization. And so I don't understand why people see education any different. That in fact, one would argue that the stakes are even higher in education, so you should have even more resources devoted to that. And so Title II is one of those federal funding streams. Now, as you well know, Drew, that those are supplemental funds, so states must also do that work. States and local jurisdictions must also have monies in their budgets to do that. Mm-hmm. But as we know, the economy is tight everywhere in terms of, everything's more expensive, and there's, you know what I mean? People need more help and more support. So I know local governments are strapped. But the long story being, the short part of the long story is we advocate for Title II funding in addition to the other federal titles. One, for children and families who come from economically disadvantaged households. Title III, which is monies for to support children learning language other than English, or speak a language other than English at home. And those are the three big ones, really. But there's also Title IV and IDEA. So we advocate for all of those funding streams because those supplemental funds from the federal government really help to augment the local funding and also make sure that there's dedicated funding for some of these very important endeavors, especially like when you're talking about special education. Mm-hmm. So, but Title II we advocate for because we believe that quality professional learning is done through a blend of what folks think you need and what you think you need, right? Like, it's this question of need and want. So, for example, I want to learn about X. Well, my district needs to need me to learn about Y. So, quality professional learning is finding a connection between what I want to learn and what I need to learn, and being able to do that in a way that brings it out, so that it becomes a very wholesome activity for me. And so, professional learning is difficult because we moved in No Child Left Behind. We moved away from this quality professional learning. We started doing this sort of train the trainer thing, which I'm sure that could be a whole nother show, Drew. I'm sure you've got your own thoughts about the chaos that train the trainer became. So yeah, we believe in this sort of mentoring, coaching. Education is a relationship and people oriented, and we want to model for educators in their professional development how we want them to mentor and coach children. And so that's not cheap. Right. It's much easier to send everybody to a workshop. Drew, I apologize preaching to the choir here, especially to all your listeners to it. I'm sure everybody's like, come on, man. But everybody knows you're not going to get any. It's much easier to go do a workshop, give everybody a handout and tell them they were trained, than it is for you to sit down with me and coach me through it so I can, gradually release the responsibility. You can model for me, help me, coach me. We do it together, and then you watch me do it and give me feedback. That latter model takes more money and more time, but the chance of success is so much greater on that model. And so we advocate for things like that: mentoring and coaching, sustained professional development that actually follows the official definition of professional learning, which means it's job embedded and research driven and all of those things. So that's the long and short of it. That's why we continue to advocate for Title II funding in addition to the other federal titles.
Yeah, well, one of the things that you are, I guess, pushing for or have pushed for, and this does kind of get into some of the partisan pieces, so I'm curious how this sort of played out, the loan forgiveness idea, of which, I have some concerns and some wonders about as well, and the efficacy of doing that on a large scale. Now, you're talking about something more specific than the sort of one that, the loan forgiveness that's talked about on a national scale for everybody, and or whatever. I don't even know how to characterize it, but the one that's generally in the news. Here we're talking about loan forgiveness for educators and the specific Loan Forgiveness for Educators Act. So I'm curious what that ended up to be, if that was it made its way or if it's still in process. And also, I'm sure you got and will get some pushback on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, as I understand it, this all goes back to it's all really tied to people's beliefs. This is what I believe is that it's more about the larger national debt than it is the actual subjects of the lines. So my point is, anytime we're increasing the deficit, that's a problem for folks.
Mm-hmm.
And so people look for ways to minimize that, ballooning of the deficit. And so, and then philosophically, it's also like, and I agree with this too. If you commit to something, then you got to finish it. You say, I'm going to pay you, then you got to pay.
Mm-hmm.
What we're saying here, though, is if we want people to educate, as you know, education doesn't pay well.
Right.
They get a lot of flack. People, it's hard to be a teacher or a support staff in a school today. You got to deal with all this other stuff that it was much different than like when I started. Pressures from the outside, is social media, all this stuff, right? And then of course the kids and families have been through a lot and are going through a lot, and it's hard to make a living out there today. So people come with a lot of baggage, if you will, a lot of needs, and they come to school. So it's hard to be an educator. So the pay is not great. It's increasingly harder to serve in the capacity of school staff or a central office staff. Well, then you hear all this stuff. You see all this. Whichever side of the ball people play from, you just see all this stuff in the news, but it's just negative, right? And you and I both know there's amazing things happening in every single school in this country. Like, maybe we don't have it all figured out perfectly, but there's not a school in this country that isn't doing something amazing. These are committed people who care about kids, and they're doing their best. So one of the things you say, well, if you can't change the pay significantly and you're not going to address the conditions and whatever, you should at least incentivize people, good people who meet the qualifications, to choose education as a career, and let them do it without accumulating debt. Our problem in education is you get people that don't get paid a lot, that spend a lot of money to go to school to get their degrees, and then they can't make a living because the degree that they earn doesn't pay enough to pay off their debt. Like, I get it. I understand from a X's and O's, a dollars and cents perspective. I get it. If you just take away all the other stuff and you just look at the numbers, I can see where people are like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. But I think if you factor in, these are the people who are going to educate our nation's most valuable resource. Seriously, you can't help them not have debt in addition to committing an entire life to public service. That to me is that's the part that like I said, if we really truly believe that this is the United States of America, is we wanted to have a world-class, the best educational system in the world, we'd have it. Because we can do anything. It's just a matter of whether or not we can align all the pieces to make sure that we recruit. I'm not. Just think about college or professional athletics. There's a full-blown system developed to make sure that we have the best athletes in the best positions at every level, at the collegiate and professional level. And that system really works, man. We are able to identify and grow and recruit and coach and organize amazing talent to do incredible things. we can do that in education too. It's not just for collegiate and professional sport.
Yeah. Well, if I'm understanding it correctly, and I'm looking at the text here of sort of a report that you all shared, the Loan Forgiveness for Educators Act is to incentivize folks to get into education programs and high need public schools by giving them an opportunity to get some of that loan and specific education programming loan. And I think it looks like the cap is at $17,500, which is really not a lot compared to the cost of some of these programs, certainly. And so it's an incentivization. It's not a bailout of something that somebody may have committed to, or maybe it's a little bit of both of some existing loans is what I'm referring to there. When bailout is kind of a pejorative term, but hopefully it makes sense there, right? So one is to incentivize them to get into these programs and to teach at these places that are really high need, and then the other that might also be a part of some existing loan and things like that. And we do incentivization programs all the time. I was talking with, this has been a couple of years ago, Diana Hess, who at least at that point was, and I imagine still is, the Dean of Education at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And one thing that they had done is a program for folks who are willing to teach in certain schools and a number of years. It's like, I think like no tuition or almost no tuition or something like that. And I was like, wow, that's a heck of an incentive. And of course, it's a public university, so it's public funds and all of those kinds of things. So just some clarity on that. One other thing I wanted to touch on here with this budget stuff is the idea and support of mental health. And you've referred to it a few times, and we're certainly seeing it's harder to be an educator for a lot of reasons. One of those is behavior in schools. One of those is it's just a really challenging job. We also have some external pressures outside of school, some of the culture war kinds of things that makes it harder and harder. And so mental health is a real issue. And so if you can kind of talk about some of the things that you are advocating for and maybe some of the things that the budget actually included to do to actually meet some of those needs.
Yeah, so this is I'm thankful that there's been this bipartisan acknowledgement of the mental health and well-being needs of people. I mean, it's not just about kids or educate. I mean, it's everybody. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people out there have expressed that and I come from a time when it was not okay to say that. Mm-hmm. I was raised in a time where you don't say those things.
Stiff upper lip.
Yeah, and times are different now, but so we advocate for making sure that there are these supports for the accessible and truly available supports for people, because in order for Maslow's hierarchy, for those, everyone on this podcast knows Maslow's hierarchy, but for people who might not know, the Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're not going to get to this level of the levels of self-actualization where people are really at their very best if they are struggling with basic human security needs, or they're troubled with making ends meet, and obviously it's very hard to be the best version of yourself when you're struggling with all of these burdens. And I'm thankful that there's a recognition that the combination of things is not just the pandemic, but life's hard today. The pressures that kids face through social media and peer pressure, the availability of all kinds of drugs and substances is prevalent. There's a lot of economic and financial pressure in the world. There's a lot of social pressures. We were talking about some of the other ones before we jumped on the call. So people are, it's hard to be okay in these times, and some people need support, some people don't, right? So we want to just make sure that the people who need it, and there's been a lot of progress in that, and there's been quite a bit of work on sort of the destigmatization of mental health, but we still have kids and families that can't get services, can't find, or waiting a long time for an appointment because the pipeline there for mental health professionals has taken a minute they've started work on growing the pipeline there, but nobody knew that there would be this mass. Nobody knew the pandemic was coming, and like reasonably so, the world spent time worrying about the biological aspects of it, not so much the psychological aspects of it until we started to see the signs. So we've advocated for this mental health and well-being supports forever, but especially since the pandemic. And we're thankful to see movement around that, and that it's bipartisan, because I understand there are terms that people don't want to talk about, but everywhere I go, it does not matter whether the state is purple or red or blue or whatever. I talk to people, and as you know, we did a national survey at NASSP in 2022, and it was, I mean, the data from that survey was shocking. That 73% of school leaders and 74, we did a nationally representative sample of students and school leaders. 73% of school leaders and 74% of students reported that they needed help with their mental or emotional health last year. I mean, it's like 3/4 of the folks that we surveyed, and they all agreed that there needs to be more services and supports. Like, so again, like I said, this is not us like sitting in a room dreaming up stuff to talk about. This is what the people that we serve are saying. Our membership from every walk of life, from every state, every jurisdiction. Same with the kids. These are kids from everywhere in the country, from all different kinds of backgrounds and families. And when you get that kind of agreement on anything, especially in education, when you get that kind of agreement on anything, that's the real problem. Like, or that's real data, I should say. And so, when 3/4 of the people we surveyed saying they needed help with their mental health, and that, first of all, that would have never been admitted to when I was coming up. And second, when people admit, when you ask people what they think and they tell you, then a respectable organization does something about it. And so that's why we've taken such a strong stand.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that, and I mentioned it before, and maybe this is a good topic to dive into as we wrap up, are those external pressures and some of those culture war things. And that's one of the things that we're trying to help with and help schools with. And since the last time we talked, we've developed what we call an teaching objective pluralism workshop and work with schools. And working, it's not just teaching, but thinking that way and trying to help schools. And I think principals and school leaders are obviously a big piece of this, and helping them understand, because they're getting a lot of that pressure. They're maybe one of the first lines of that criticism and heat. And so one of the things we want to do is, as we think about it, is to really lean into some of those, what I would say are Enlightenment liberal principles of making sure we're recognizing there is a diversity of perspectives, and that's a good thing.
Yep.
And not saying that none of those are worth listening to. Matter of fact, lots of them are, and they're important, but there's also a set of accepted facts and knowledge that we have come to consensus on. It's always open for revision, because that's what we do. We revise based on new information, but making sure that and helping educators and principals, I think, are a big piece of this. Again, understand the distinctions between sort of a liberal authoritarianism, and some of those pressures are coming from the left and the right, sort of in this culture war kind of thing.
Yep.
And helping them understand that, but then say, how do we actually lean into those principles that will value the pluralism and the viewpoint diversity, but also make sure that we're actually leaning into consensus, the truth as we have figured it out by consensus. Jonathan Rauch would say the constitution of knowledge, and that process of checking empirically and all of those things. And so that's something that we've tried to work with schools on. And I'm curious what, if anything, and you said NASSP is not a partisan or a political group, so maybe this isn't in your purview, but I'm curious if your principals and membership have sort of asked for any of that kind of help, or expressed like how do we deal with these outbursts at school boards coming at us, and all of the heat that I'm sure you're well aware of.
Yeah. So we actually, so there's a number of things that we do in service of our members around this area, and it sounds really simple, but one of the best things that we have done is bring our members together and create a space where they can talk about these issues openly, because they can't talk about these in their home communities. It's very difficult to talk about what they're going through. So being in a room of other principals who are going through similar variations or similar versions of it is really helpful. So there's a sort of level setting around that, like, okay, this is kind of happening to everybody in one way or another, and then how are people dealing? So then there's a sort of coming together around that, and then there's a sharing of how people have navigated it. And we provide professional learning opportunities for members to how to navigate these difficult conversations and difficult climates, right? And ultimately it goes back to, no secrets here, it goes back to the kids and the families. And what I say all the time is I've been all around the country, talked to kids and families and educators from every reach of our membership. And it's funny, like everybody, parents, anywhere you go, everybody wants the same thing. Okay, there's like 80% of it everybody wants the same of. Everybody wants their kid to be healthy and happy. They want them to have friends. They want them to know that they have a real shot at a positive future. They want them to be good people. They want them to enjoy life and have meaningful connections at school and healthy relationships. Everybody, they want them to be successful and smart, get good grades. Everybody wants, 80% of the people I talk to, they want that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got, one group wants this, and then you start to get more extreme, and the percentage of those is much smaller on the tail end of that bell curve. So what I tell everybody over and over and over again is, okay, guys, I get it. How about we focus on making sure all those things that we talked about that everybody wants? Kids having a real shot at a future, happy and healthy. They enjoy being with their peers, have a meaningful connection with an adult at school. How about we make sure that every kid has that 80% first? Because that could be a huge step towards a world-class education system, right? We'll do that first, and then we'll worry about the extremes after. Let's make sure all the kids are taken care of. 80% of the kids' issues are solved, and we have solid supports for this. Let's keep the main thing. Let's make sure the kids are all right. And then we can worry about all this other stuff that our members tell us that in the pandemic, it was way worse because it was, people were really frustrated about something. But my members have told us that the difficult conversations are navigable now. And I've also heard that a lot of the folks that are causing those difficult conversations are not even school parents. These are people who don't have children at the school. Mm-hmm. And what we found is the members our members who are making really great progress have these incredible relationships and rapports with their parents. So schools on the move, as you well know, schools on the move that are doing great work for kids and moving the needle, their parents and their school community knows about everything because the school has a really great system of communication. So they don't get so those schools don't get so bogged down by this external stuff because the parents parents like the school. They have faith in the school. They might have issues with the school, but they're not the kind where they're going to come down there and, cause that kind of ruckus and disrupt the school operation. So thankfully that the overall angst of that has appeared to settle down a bit. Don't get me wrong. Our members still have, every day there's always something, but it's not the same where like, oh my God, we can't even operate the school anymore. Our members' number one concern is now more kids and the disengagement of kids and the attendance issues of kids. because, as you well know, the pandemic disrupted everything, especially for kids who may not have all the systems and supports. The most vulnerable kids got affected, more than disproportionately than others. And so, that's our members' concern is more about that rather. They're not. I mean, they are concerned about the difficult conversations, but it's not as bad as it was.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, their attention is more focused on kids now. So, we provide these professional learning opportunities for them to just be in a space with other folks who are going through it, and then two, we help them understand how to understand the perspectives. And for example, we did a training like this for our people going up on the Hill. We had actually different members of Congress and their representatives come in and talk with our members about, if you're going to talk to people in Party X, these are the things that we want to talk about. These are the things we don't want to talk about. And then if you're going to go to Party Y, here's the things that we want to talk about, and here's the things that we don't want to talk about. So our members understood before they went into there that, if you're going to talk to somebody who's passionate about making sure they're a budget hawk, then you want to talk to them about how the money that they allocated last year was spent wisely and what the results were, right? You gotta tell them about the work that you really did, and you have to put it in a way that is in the frame of the people that we're trying to talk to. And this would be a lot different if our members weren't these kind of honest, public servant type people. But these people they're not in there trying to make a name for themselves or add a check mark to they're not there for that. They're like, man, I'm trying to get every resource I can possibly get to serve the kids in my community. And I think that genuineness and authenticity and credibility shows up in those settings. And so we like the idea of principals as community leaders who are principals, as you know, principals have dealt with difficult conversations as long as we can remember in schools. Now,
Yep.
Parental support was a bit different back in the day than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
That definition's changed a bit, but nonetheless, you can't have an excellent school without excellent parents, and and that has nothing to do with economics or station or whatever. If parents are supportive of the school in whichever the way they choose to be supportive, that's a good recipe for school success. And so our members have. We encourage and help and support our members to be that kind of community leader that has real relationships with their community members, so that the community members know that if there's a problem, they're going to hear the straight scoop from their principal. Now, obviously, they can't disclose all the details for legal reasons, but they're going to hear it first from their principal, and then they're going to have confidence that the school's on top of it and they're going to fix it. And similarly, when there's exciting things, they're going to hear it first from their school's principal, and they're going to be excited about celebrating the successes of the school. So we've figured out that the best way to navigate the culture wars is to keep the main thing, which is to focus on making sure that every kid gets what they need in order to be successful.
Gotcha. Well, this is a good place for me to give a plug, because one of the things you're talking about is the community-led and more local control. And one of the things that we're offering is an event, online discussion event of our Thought Structures education community is on April 18th. We're having a discussion titled Catalyzing Community-Led Change, Overcoming the Divisive and Narrow Politics of Our Time. And we're going to talk about some of those very things, right? So the Harwood Institute, if you're familiar with them, I was not until I was introduced to them, but Rich Harwood and the Harwood Institute has a report that kind of details some of those things. And then Bridget Blom, who's with the Pritchard Committee here in Kentucky, and they've been really spearheading community-led schools here in Kentucky and doing some really great work. So we're going to dive into that, because I do think, as to your point, that is, all politics has become national at this point, and it's bizarre, it's bonkers. We're not paying attention to and engaging with our communities, and our schools are obviously a big part of that in ways that are actually much more meaningful and more important, and reflect the values of communities and so on and so forth. So if folks are interested in that, you can go to thoughtstructures.org, and it's in the events, and you can RSVP and join us and be a part of that conversation. So that's my plug for that event. Well, Ron, I appreciate you coming back to the podcast. It's always a great pleasure to talk with you, and I appreciate the work that NASSP is doing with trying to communicate with our legislators. That's a daunting task because they don't always seem the most. I'll just say it's a daunting task. I don't want to cast too many aspersions. I'm sure folks could fill in the blanks there. But anything else you want to share, any links or anything like that before we jump off?
No, just two things. One, first of all, just cycling back to the event that you're having. Mm-hmm. The fact that you're doing that work. First of all, thank you for doing that work, Drew. And the fact that you're doing it is emboldens me to okay, we're on the right track. This when good people are doing, people that you respect and good people are doing work that resonates with you, then that it can be inspiring and validating at the same time. So congratulations to you, and thanks for the little boost there. I think we're on the right track with this.
Thank you.
You and us, I think we're on the right track. That's one. And then two, thank you for always taking the time to reach out and to shine a light on things that maybe people don't always get a chance to know about or hear about, because as educators, we don't toot our own horns. We don't, which is a problem for us. We don't toot our own horns. We don't like to brag about the stuff that's happened, because as one of our members said, Ron, if I have 100 kids and 97 of them are doing great, my focus is on I'm happy for the 97, but I'm focused on what do I need to do to get the 3 over the finish line. Right? So we don't often talk about the 97 because we're thrilled and proud of them, and we did a lot of work to get them over the finish line, but we still have 3 more that didn't get it. Right? So I think anytime you have an opportunity, a venue like this for people to talk about some of the things that are happening below the radar in education, and hopefully people who might not be familiar with it get a chance to access and learn about it. And hopefully it opens their perspective a little bit or broadens their perspective a little bit more about what's happening in education. That I appreciate that very much, Drew. So anything that we can do to continue to support the work you're doing, and we talked earlier, I'll connect you up and make sure we follow up. But thank you very much, Drew, and continued success to you, and keep doing your thing, brother. This is necessary and good.
Well, I appreciate that. So the website, if anybody is not familiar and doesn't know, is NASSP.org, so National Association of Secondary School Principals.org, and there they can find all kinds of things and resources and links and things like that, including the things we talked about today. So once again, thanks, Ron, and you keep up the good work as well.
What we need to do is spend enough time together that we can start to translate our ideas into each other's language and include one another in this community of inquiry. And that is the work of love.